Thank you, Dr. Jamil, for inviting me to this forum to talk about some of the to talk about the crisis of democracy in India. Arfa spoke very eloquently about how this government is crushing a very beautiful movement that came up, which was led from the front by mostly women, mostly Muslim women, against this unconstitutional law, the Citizenship Amendment Act, and how the government is using the riots, which were clearly instigated and fanned by the BJP leaders like Kapil Mishra, Anurag Thakur, etc. Those very riots are being used to victimize and arrest some of the leading activists who were involved in this anti-CAA movement, especially young people like those students from Pinjara Tod and so on, these girls. Uh, so there is undoubtedly a very, very serious and severe attack on dissent, on freedom of speech, on activism. And the arrests of some of our finest activists in the Bhima Koregaon case, people who have been charged with conspiracy to murder Mr. Modi. I mean, utterly absurd charges, but unfortunately, the UAPA law is such that even totally mala fide, baseless, evidenceless FIRs and investigations and charge sheets, etc., which will eventually collapse when the matter is tried, lead to people being inside jails for years altogether. The Bhima Koregaon activists have already been in jail for about 2 years or more. But the crisis is more serious than just this attack on activism, on freedom of expression, etc. There is a wholesale attack on all our regulatory institutions which were created to protect democracy, particularly the judiciary, the uh, election commission, the Comptroller and Auditor General, the Human Rights Commission, all the police investigative agencies, including the NIA, the CBI, the Enforcement Directorate, and the police organizations, the Lokpal, and most importantly, on the media. Uh, there is not just an attack on these institutions, there is an attack on our culture and civilizational values themselves, and a culture of mob violence, lynching on the streets, vulgar abuse against people who disagree with the government, threats of rape and deaths, etc., being administered by the IT cell of the BJP on the social media. Uh, we are also seeing a very concerted and serious attack on critical thinking itself, on the ability of people to reason and to distinguish between truth and falsehood. A kind of climate is being created with a totally complicit media to bludgeon and destroy the ability of the people to think about which issues matter, which issues are important, to even distinguish between truth and falsehood. And a post-truth, what is called a post-truth society is being created in India, where perception becomes everything. Perception replaces reality, where this government is trying to just remain in office and win elections by creating perception, by just using the media and the money that they have under their control for advertising and making the people believe that black is white and white is black. There is an attack on scientific temper itself. This Prime Minister went to inaugurate the Reliance Hospital, and there he said that Lord Ganesha's trunk was a fine piece of plastic surgery in ancient India. He said that Kern was the product of in vitro fertilization, which was practiced in ancient India. He told children in some kind of a children's meeting that there is no such thing as climate change. And it is just that as we grow old, we start feeling colder. So it is something similar to that, that people have started feeling warmer. His ministers go around saying that we will chant go Corona, and Corona will go away. His other minister says that I have invented some papad which will make Corona go away. So it's a wholesale attack on thought itself, on science itself, on critical thinking itself, on culture and civilization itself, quite apart from the attack on institutions. But what is very serious today is that, in fact, Justice A.P. Shah, the former Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court, gave a very, very important speech yesterday, which all of you should read. It's been published by The Wire and Live Law. It was the Justice Suresh Memorial lecture that he gave yesterday, in which he said that there is a very concerted and wholesale attack on all the regulatory institutions. And he mentioned all of these. Of course, he focused primarily on the judiciary, because the judiciary is the most important institution which has been created to protect the constitution, to protect fundamental rights, and to protect our democracy. But unfortunately, he says that in the last 6 years, precisely since this Modi regime came, the judiciary seems to have collapsed, particularly the Supreme Court seems to have collapsed, and it has just knelt down before this fascist government and has not done anything to protect fundamental rights, or virtually done nothing to protect fundamental rights, to protect uh, uh, our other democratic institutions, to protect constitutional values. I mean, there are so many important cases which are not being heard. The, the case challenging the Unconstitutional Citizenship Amendment Act is not being heard. The cases challenging the abolition of Article 370 is not being heard. Dividing Kashmir and making it into a union territory is not being heard. Internet shutdowns were heard, but ultimately the court said that, all right, this government committee will again look into the internet shutdown in Kashmir. The cases involving violence on Jamia, on JNU, etc., are not being heard. And among the cases which have been decided, the Ayodhya case, for example, the same people who were held guilty of a criminal conspiracy to illegally demolish a mosque, they have been given that entire land to build the temple. And in a secular country, the Prime Minister goes to lay the foundation stone of that temple, and the Supreme Court just approves this kind of thing and watches all this. In the Judge Loya case, where the judge who was trying Amit Shah for conspiracy to murder, etc., several people in fake encounters, that judge mysteriously dies. There are several circumstances which suggest that his death was not a natural death, but the Supreme Court just went on the basis of some note furnished to them in a sealed cover by the government and said that there was no need for an investigation. That note was not even signed by anybody. Nobody took responsibility for that. It was not even shown to the other parties, completely in violation of natural justice. And this is a new jurisprudence that the Supreme Court has invented, what is called the sealed cover jurisprudence. Even in the Rafael case, they resorted to the same thing, that government gave them some information which later turned out to be totally false, which on the basis of which they gave that judgment. And that sealed cover note was unsigned, not even shown to the other side. In the Birla Sahara case, where there was unimpeachable evidence collected by the income tax department to show that Mr. Modi had received 40 crores from Sahara, 25 crores from Birla, that many other politicians, including Shivraj Singh, had got 10 crores from Sahara, etc. All cash was all laid out in that Sahara computer in great detail, dates, places, person who went to deliver the money, person in whose hand the money was delivered, where it was delivered, etc. But the Supreme Court says that no, these are loose papers, and on this, big people like Prime Minister and other chief ministers, etc., cannot be investigated on this basis. So, we have seen the collapse of the Supreme Court in the last few years. We have also seen the Election Commission was supposed to be a very, very independent institution for the last more than 30 years. But over the last few years, we have seen the Election Commission fixing dates for elections on the basis of what the government wants. The government knows in advance what dates are going to be fixed for the elections. The model code of conduct is not being enforced against the Prime Minister or this Amit Shah, despite the fact that they wantonly flout the model code of conduct. The another case that the Supreme Court has not dealt with is the electoral bonds case, as a result of which bribes have been virtually legalized by this anonymous route of political funding which has been created. I mean, several retrograde changes have been made in political funding laws. One is that foreign funding of political parties has been allowed through subsidiaries of foreign companies. The limit for political donations by companies has been removed. Earlier, there was a limit of 7.5% of the annual profits. That has been removed. And yet the Election Commission is doing nothing about it. The CAG, which was again an independent institution created to audit government funds, that has been emasculated and made like a government body now. The audit of the Rafale contract, of the Rafale jet contract, in that the pricing details have been removed. For the first time in 70 years, the CAG has removed pricing details from an audit of a defense deal at the instance of the government. The offset contracts given to this Anil Ambani's Reliance company, Reliance Defense, that audit has been omitted because of government pressure over the CAG. The NHRC has become a totally bogus, useless body, has been made into a useless body. The Lokpal was not appointed initially for several years. When we went to the court, finally they were forced to appoint a Lokpal, but they have appointed such thoroughly useless people that for more than 1 year since their appointment, they have been just sitting twiddling their thumbs. They have not even taken up one investigation. All these other investigating agencies, the CBI, the NIA, the Enforcement Directorate, they have been rendered handmaidens and tools of the government to harass their political opponents, to harass the independent media. Independent media is also being harassed by all these, including the Income Tax Department. And the worst thing that has happened in India is the collapse of the mainstream media, because the mainstream media is now reduced. You should see the prime time debates on most of these mainstream news channels, barring few very honorable exceptions like NDTV or Rajdeep Sardesai's program on India Today TV. But the rest of the mainstream media has just collapsed. They are just spreading fake news, hate, and covering totally irrelevant issues in order to divert people's attention from real issues. As I said, They are bludgeoning the capacity of people to distinguish between truth and falsehood, and thereby contributing to create a post-truth society where people will be unable to distinguish between truth and falsehood, and therefore everything will depend upon perception. Fortunately, the internet media and the social media works both ways. In one sense, the social media has also been used by this government and by the BJP's IT cell to spread hatred, to spread fake news, etc. But it is also a democratizing medium in the sense that people without having large sums of money can also spread their message through YouTube channels, through Twitter and Facebook accounts, etc. So there are people like Dhruv Rathi or Akash Banerjee who have used the social media and the internet media to good effect. There are internet media organizations which have been created like The Wire, where Arfaji works, like Scroll, like NewsClick, etc., which are doing a fantastic job. And it is largely because of them that there is still some media alive in this country. The other heartening thing is that despite the attempts of the government to crush all dissent, to come down heavily on activists, etc., to try and crush people who speak up against the government and shut them up, yet, despite all this effort, etc., there are a large number of people still standing up and speaking out. And meanwhile, the economy of this country has collapsed because this government is totally clueless. They do not have any proper experts because Mr. Modi just wants the experts to just ditto whatever he wants. He decided on the note ban himself without consulting any experts. He decided on the lockdown himself without consulting any experts. And he wants all the people in the Niti Aayog or Reserve Bank, etc., to be just yes men. So no self-respecting economists have survived to advise this government, nor does this government want any proper advice because they are not interested in the common man. And today, unemployment and economic collapse have become very, very big issues in the country. And I can see that public opinion is clearly turned because we can see from the YouTube accounts of the BJP, Mr. Modi, or from their Facebook accounts and other social media accounts that uh, the public opinion, especially of young people, has clearly turned against this government. And I hope that in the time to come, we will see a very large civil society movement, especially on the issue of unemployment, which is the most burning issue for young people in this country, and which will turn the sort of political climate in this country, because it is absolutely essential to throw out this government uh, because if this government remains in power for long, we can say goodbye to everything that we value and cherish, everything that our constitution stands for. So therefore, let's work towards getting rid of this government. Let's work towards starting a large people's movement, a civil society movement against the destruction of our democracy, and especially against joblessness and for the right to employment. Thank you very much.